Yeah, my view is, Sean, is that he needs to be impeached. I mean, really, I think it has risen to the level when you systematically disregard the laws of this country, when you systematically mislead the American people and lie, as you said, lie and lie and lie to Congress and the American people. You're not doing your job and you should be removed.
Senator Josh Hawley just told on himself. In that diatribe on Fox News, he said, when you systematically mislead the American people and lie and lie and lie to the American people, you are not doing your job and should be removed. Senator Hawley's hypocrisy here is stunning. His career has been built on deception and lies, and one of those, about the 2020 election, was a leading cause of the January 6th insurrection. Josh Hawley is the embodiment of political ambition and cowardice, and somehow he gets away with it. I've actually met him a few times when we attended Yale Law School together, but I wanted to talk to someone who knew him well. Ravi Gupta is an old friend of mine and a fellow classmate from Yale, where he and Josh Hawley were good friends. I think you'll really appreciate Ravi's perspective. For years, I have struggled to understand why such smart and accomplished people like Josh Hawley sacrifice everything that I think is important, integrity, honor, the respect of their peers, for the pursuit of raw power. Ravi has some insights that I think you'll find really interesting. Not necessarily reassuring. In some ways, Hawley is just a symptom of a thoroughly corrupted political party. But the window Ravi offers into the mindset of a powerful, albeit broken politician is fascinating. Here's our conversation. My guest today is Ravi Gupta, a fellow host here on the MeidasTouch Network and an old friend. He served in the Obama administration, and before that, we were classmates at Yale Law School, where Ravi became close friends with another Yale law student, Josh Hawley. I wanted to reconnect with Ravi to talk about how ambition can corrupt someone so completely. I myself lost a good friend to that same kind of ambition and have been wrestling with how to understand what makes this happen to someone you think you know. Sorry to make it so personal, Ravi, but I think it's important to understand people like Josh Hawley who sacrifice everything in the pursuit of power. Thank you so much for joining us.
For sure. Yeah, my background with Josh Hawley is I came to Yale Law School in the same class that you did, and we have a mutual friend who I won't name because I'm sure he wouldn't like to get dragged into this, but who is, a little bit more on the conservative spectrum, and also did a Bible study group, and we all were in the same building together, and we were 1Ls, and, as it works, the 3Ls kind of mentor the 1Ls, and there were a lot of members of that 3L class, like Karen Dunn and others who, were critical to my future careers, whether it's on Obama campaign or elsewhere. And very quickly, I was introduced to Josh when he was a 3L through that mutual friend. And I was always like a Democrat and kind of like everybody knew me as that. But I really prided myself because I come from a family that's split politically, of just having not judging anybody by their politics and trying to have a diverse group of friends in every respect. And he and I became friends, and we would have lunch together. We wound up in a couple classes together, like Brillmeyer's Conflicts of Law, and he would send me his notes and give me advice. And, I remember he even met my mom a few times, and I think they became Facebook friends. And, it's like, he wasn't like my best friend in the world, but he certainly was among the upperclassmen who I was closest with. And even in the years after we graduated, I kept in touch with him. We'd have lunch every now and then. And obviously his turn, if we want to call it that, in that Senate race, or really even before that when he was AG, was disappointing to say the least. I mean, we can get into it, but his, he was playing a game, I guess, and I was bummed out because he's somebody who has a lot of gifts, and it was a bummer to see him use those gifts in the way that he's using them.
When does that game become character defining? Because I think it starts out as performative. It starts out with someone like Josh Hawley rationalizing to themselves the things they need to do to gain power to then be able to do good, the things they need to do to get votes to then be able to do good. But in the act of performing, in the act of pretending to be something you're not, in the act of playing that game, I feel like it changes you. I've seen that happen to other people that I care about. And I'm wondering, looking at Josh Hawley now and those in his orbit who are really the drivers of some of this insanity and intolerance within the Senate and the breaking of all these norms, I wonder if some of them are buying into it now. I had a commanding officer who used to talk about drinking your own bathwater. If they are actually buying their own BS.
Yeah, I think they do buy their own BS by and large. I think it starts out, I think it's like the frog in the boiling pot of water or whatever. Like, I think you make some decisions consciously knowing, hey, like, I'm going to put up with a little bit of indignity here and there. I'm going to cut some corners. I'm going to say a couple of things I don't believe. But the story you tell yourself is, I'm doing it because when I get to, this position, I can do the things I care about. Like, the story you tell yourself is that you're still in pursuit of some larger aims. It rare is the person, I mean, they do exist. Trump is certainly one of these people. Rare is the person who doesn't tell them a story at all about how they're doing any good in the world, right? Like, Josh Hawley's probably sitting around and he's probably talking to his wife. They're probably rolling their eyes at like the crazy thing Trump did or whatever. And they're just like, well, this is what it means to be, to be a transformative leader, is that you have to make certain choices in service of power. And Hawley, I'm sure, like, sees himself. I mean, he wrote a book about Teddy Roosevelt. He probably sees himself as this figure, this historic figure. And I think he's like willing to, breeze past a lot of ethical lines to become like this, president. I'm sure he looks in the mirror and says, I want to be president of the United States. And he wants to be like some kind of transformative figure. And, like, what's unfortunate is he has gotten very far very fast with the strategy.
It's that sense of grandiosity and historical mission that I think imbues a story like this with a degree of dangerousness that run-of-the-mill ambition doesn't have. And when you have people like Josh Hawley thinking that they have a special role within history to fill, I mean, it can excuse all kinds of compromises and eventually outrages. And I think Josh Hawley's raised fist is a great example of that. I didn't know him. I mean, I met him like I probably met most people at Yale Law School, but didn't know him like you did. Did he always have that sense of himself as a man of destiny?
Yeah, he wouldn't talk about it, but the difference. Like, in law school, you meet people who, and anywhere, whenever you're around a lot of people who are ambitious, there are certain people who maintain their level of authenticity and humanity, and they're still ambitious, but they're, you can have like an honest conversation with them, and you don't feel like their guard is always up. And Josh was always somebody who I felt like had his hair perfectly coiffed and, spoke like a politician even when he was in his early 20s. He carried himself that way as somebody who's very guarded and, very calculating. And so, in a way, in looking back, like, I was and am an idealistic person. And so I never really sized people up that way, but looking back, certainly the signs were there that this is a guy who was calculating and a bit of a climber in a even in a level of magnitude that set him apart from people that we went to law school with.
His religiosity, and I talked to other people in that Bible group, seemed sincere then. I don't know about now, but he did seem to be, fervently dedicated to his faith, which is in a lot of ways something that I admire, but increasingly in politics, it's something I fear. and I'm going to tie it to something that's unfolding in Ohio right now, where we just passed this massively important ballot initiative to enshrine abortion rights in our Constitution. But Republicans in our state legislature are saying things like, no amendment can supersede God's will for his children. And that kind of religiosity, when the bearer assumes a divine mandate to override democratic norms and traditions, that's really dangerous. And in Josh Hawley, you've got someone who not only has this personal delusion of grandeur, but you get the sense that he thinks God is talking to him personally.
Yeah, I hesitate to question somebody's faith, but I do have questions. like either he doesn't believe it and he's playing a game because he knows he has to present a certain front to get elected, or he is so slippery and so thirsty for the office that he'll interpret the scripture and his religion in ways that defy logic and the text and the tradition itself. Like either one of those two things is true. I mean, I have an opinion of which of those two it is, but it's probably not solid ground because I'm not in his head. But he either is, profoundly, like astray on what any fair reading of scripture says, or he just doesn't believe it.
Well, let's not make it ad hominem with respect to Josh, because I'd love your overall take in how the Christian militancy of the GOP today is affecting their political prescriptions. I mean, you have in the person of Mike Johnson, unanimously voted by his caucus to be Speaker of the House, an actual Christian nationalist who says that we don't live in a democracy, we live in a biblical republic. How do you feel about the way the overt religiosity of the Republican Party is driving policy prescriptions?
Yeah, I mean, from a tactical perspective, as a Democrat, it gives us a huge opportunity because it's wildly unpopular
Right.
with the American public. I mean, it's a political gift, but a moral threat. You know, like at the same time, those are two sides of the same coin. Obviously, on abortion, they overstepped, and they're paying the political price for that. And unfortunately, women across America are also paying the price for that. And the more they do that kind of stuff, the more they're the Tucker Carlson of 1996 version of the Republican Party, the part of the Republican Party that Ben Shapiro, tries to hide. Like the Ben Shapiros of the world, will put on the flannel shirt and pretend like they're populists. But whenever given the chance, they'll lecture us on our personal decisions. Whenever they do the latter, that is, when they expose themselves like that, that is a tremendous opportunity for us as Democrats or even independents to remind the American public that these are full-blown extremists, and that entire part of their agenda is unpopular. And it's why you see people like Bashir win. It's why Youngkin got crushed in the state legislative races. It's why we overperformed in the last midterm elections, is because all that stuff is unpopular.
What makes me think that Josh Hawley and the other really smart politicians around him are opportunists and cynics and not true believers,
for sure,
is the way they moderate when they get crushed at the polls. The true believers seem to double down and say the reason we lost is because we didn't go hard enough on restricting women's rights. And you're hearing people say that in Ohio. Right. They're not the best politicians. Josh Hawley is doing the opposite.
Yeah, I didn't see that. What is he saying about abortion? I didn't even realize he was walking it back a little bit.
I mean, he is talking about, leaving things like that up to the states. Mm-hmm. He is definitely walking away from national abortion ban language. and the hardcore zealots are going all in for national abortion ban. You see this from Josh Hawley as well on workers' rights in the aftermath of the UAW strike, right? Here's a senator who was fully on board with right to work legislation in Missouri until he got on the populist bandwagon and now is singing a different tune. I think that is suggestive of a political philosophy that actually is not rooted in fundamental values, but in the political wins.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. This, he's done in a way a smart thing by like this brand of his that is this sort of substantive populism, right? Like if Trump is kind of emotional populism within the right wing, Hawley is like, I'm the intellectual. He's like, I'm going to be the guy who could tell you like about antitrust law and the First Amendment. And he's playing this part where he's saying, I'm going to defy expectations. And, the chattering classes in DC, even if they hated me throwing my fist up, are going to take me seriously as an intellectual. Even Lawrence Lessig wrote a piece in Slate this week about Josh Hawley's First Amendment jurisprudence saying, essentially, and I respect Lessig a lot. I've interviewed him a couple times. He's saying like maybe Josh Hawley is the only hope for like true campaign finance reform, and he might not be wrong. I mean, you need whoever you can to pass that, and you definitely need Republicans. But this is what Hawley wants. He wants to be able to say, I'm different, and I'm willing to stand up to the special interests of both sides of the aisle. And honestly, like if I divorce myself from like him as a person and his lack of consistency, I'm like, fine. Like I welcome that, I guess. Like, like I have to treat each position he has. I think like the part of me is like, if I try to treat every politician, with a level of like scrutiny over their morals and like their consistency and their motivation for what they do, that would be a rabbit hole that I'll never come out from. So, I try to put aside my personal sort of disappointment with him and say, well, like if you're serious about that, I hope you are. We'll see how serious he is when this stuff actually comes close to passing. Right now, he pays no price for it because he could say these things that are never going to pass. And it just becomes a part of his identity. I think the key will be like if this stuff ever gets close to being law, will he put some muscle behind it?
Yeah, I guess at some level, though, you have to be able to trust a politician when they say they believe in something. And when they reverse on something as basic as right to work or union rights, it suggests they aren't trustworthy. And why would you trust them with your vote? I love the phrase substantive populism. I don't know if you just coined that, but that does seem to be the lane Hawley is trying to fill. And in some ways because he has to. I mean, his pedigree doesn't scream up by your bootstraps.
Yeah,
populist,
he's trying.
Right?
He's trying.
Right? He's got to be the academic version of a populist given his background.
Yeah, and you got to remember, I do think that this Roosevelt infatuation he has explains a lot about him. He wants to be the trust-busting Republican. He wants to be the guy who goes after the big business and all of that. And I think he senses, and he's probably not wrong, that the right frame for that is he's going after woke corporations, right? That's how he frames it to the right. And he's not winning over converts in the sort of grass tops. Like the Wall Street Journal has run multiple pieces attacking him. But if I'm thinking of this like without any emotion and I'm just a political strategist, it's not a dumb strategy. Like I actually think this sets him, you want to set yourself apart, right? And my sense is he probably regrets how out front he was on January 6th. He will never say that, but my sense is he regrets it. But he didn't walk it back, which I think is a moral failing. But I think he's like, all right, well, I got to keep myself relevant, and for 2028, how do I do that? Well, this is my best opportunity. It's like, build, use your strengths, strength upon strength, right? You your weaknesses are always going to be your weaknesses. And, he's never going to be that guy. Like, I have no love for JD Vance, but JD Vance plays the part of the authentic populist, like the, I'm actually from that town populist, which your audience will probably know better than I do how true that is or not. But he does that so much better than Hawley. And actually, if I'm Hawley, I'm more threatened by Vance than anybody, because Vance, who I have I don't know Vance. I actually hold him in an even lower regard, because Hawley never did the tour of like, oh my God, I'm like so disappointed in my party, and I hate Trump and all this kind of stuff. Like, Hawley like barely touched the surface of that. Vance made that so much part of his identity when it served him, and then he immediately jettisoned it. But Vance is a huge threat to Hawley, because he's got Vance at his best can both be the guy who's from the community, and he certainly presents himself in a way that is much harder to, especially for somebody like me who didn't serve in the military, didn't come from that area, right? It's hard for me to call that out, right? You can, Jason Kander can. But then he's also like, he's got enough intellectual horsepower. I wouldn't say he's at the level of a Hawley, but he's got enough intellectual horsepower, and certainly he's a more literary figure, both his book, but he's also just a better storyteller, and he has a better sense of the moment, I think, than Hawley. That I think he's a more serious politician than Josh Hawley is, and if I were Hawley, I would be very threatened by that.
Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your crazy neighbor. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. The look and feel of Fume is very sleek. It's well weighted, perfectly balanced, and extremely fun to fidget with. You got to try the new Solano Fume. It's made with a premium walnut barrel and an onyx-coated mouthpiece that has a slightly softer finish. Start the holidays off right with the good habit by going to tryfume.com/boats and getting the journey pack today. Fume is giving listeners of the show 10% off when they use my code BOATS to help make starting the good habit that much easier. Heart health and staying healthy, especially when you have a family that you want to be able to spend as much time as possible with, is so important. We could all benefit from heart healthy energy. One of the best ways to get some, by supporting your blood pressure and circulation. Super Beets Heart Chews are an easy and convenient way to support healthy blood pressure. They're plant-based and stimulant-free, so you get a green boost without the jitters. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Super Beets are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. Super Beets Heart Chews are incredibly delicious and so much better than any alternative supplement out there. Super Beets is the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. It's blood pressure support you can trust. Super Beets Heart Chews support healthy circulation, so you not only get blood pressure support, you also get productive, heart-healthy energy without the crash. Double your potential with Super Beets Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Super Beets Heart Chews and a free full-size bag of turmeric chews valued at $25 by going to boatsbeets.com. Get this exclusive offer only at boatsbeets.com. I suspect at least one member of the audience is screaming at their computer now because of the elephant in the room, which is Yale Law School. Let's get that out of the way. I mean,
well, yeah, it's crazy. Vivek Ramaswamy too. So many people in our law school. Actually, interestingly, not a lot of Democratic candidates, I guess. But the I don't know. I honestly don't have an answer for you. Like, it's
What am
It's
I talking
embarrassing.
about for those who?
Oh yeah, you and I
who are
went to
scratching
Yale
their
Law
heads?
School together. Vance went to Yale Law School. Hawley went to Yale Law School. Vivek Ramaswamy went to Yale Law School. I'm sure there are others, but it's embarrassing, honestly. Like it's an embarrassment to the institution. And our dean of the law school said, "Never let your skill exceed your virtue." And these are, to a person, people whose skill exceeds their virtue, and it's a huge disappointment. And what they would say to us is, "Oh, I have never run, but like." They would say and they do this to Jason Kander explicitly. I'm sure you get this, which is, you guys are just sore losers. I'm like, man, I don't know. It's just like any other human being on this earth. It's like you try to be the most authentic version of yourself you can, and you try to be the kindest, most ethical person you could be, and you want to be successful. You want to do all those things, right? You want to make your family proud. Like you want to balance your ambition with being able to look yourself in the mirror and say hey, I am the hero of this story. And I imagine that those three, and I would probably rank them, ranking them would be a fun exercise, but I think those three have a hard time looking themselves in the mirror. I would say, Vivek, who's, we haven't talked about, I think he is the worst of the three of them by far. Like, I think the three of them are all horrible in their own ways, but Vivek is truly out of bounds. I think he's not even in any way connected to a reality. And the thing is, he hasn't been as successful as those two. Obviously, he's not a senator, and he's been getting killed in this primary, but he was able to become a household name. And I just got back from India, where he's kind of a celebrity there. It just shows you this is the era of politics we're in right now.
Yeah, well, I think that probably was his goal, to be a household name, and in that sense, he has succeeded probably beyond his wildest dreams. But it speaks to that character challenge that these three men have utterly failed, which is, I think you referred to it as the look in the mirror test, but it's this idea that the holding of power is really worth it. And how many members of Congress have you met, Ravi? I've lost count, who can't imagine themselves as anything else. And I think that's what it really comes down to in the case of someone like Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz. Thank God there's one Harvard grad in the mix.
DeSantis too, I think, right?
DeSantis is Harvard Law. That's right.
Yeah.
They can't imagine themselves without the entourage. And the thought of leaving that behind causes them to do anything, including selling their soul, to hold on to it.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think the trappings of being an elected official, and you mentioned the entourage. I talk to Jason about this all the time. I think so much can be, in New York, you see this with each office people run for, they get a bigger security detail or whatever. And these little things, people are still teenagers at heart. They want the cool stuff. They want the bigger office. They want the cooler car and the security guards and all that around them. And they're willing to do almost anything to keep it. And I think the other thing is, if you're the risk of politics, and I've spent a decent amount of my adult life coaching candidates, is you have to be willing to, you have to visualize losing, and you have to visualize walking away, because otherwise, if you're not willing to walk away at any point and risk losing and have an alternative path for your life, then you start to do things either to get into office or while you're in office that are morally compromising, or you just lose and you become devastated. I've seen so many people who, you've lost races. Jason's lost races. I think both of you handled it fairly well. I've seen a lot of people who never got over it, right? And I get it, but you have to be able to visualize that loss, because if you're not willing to run and lose, especially for you guys, you're running in very tough areas. The odds are stacked against you. If you're not willing to run and lose and visualize what that's going to be like, then you shouldn't be running in the first place, because in a lot of cases, that's the most likely scenario. What you guys did was, you were against all odds, and you're going to give the coach talk and all that. But in the end, there's a lot that's out of your hands,
Yeah, knew that you coached candidates. I did not know that that was a piece of the curricula, which I think it's fantastic, because the members of Congress that stand out to me are the ones who have a line. I had this conversation with Pat Ryan recently, who, asks himself all the time and asks other prospective candidates, what's your go no go point? Like, what lines or line won't you cross? And we see what happens to people, what happens to a party when they don't know where that line is. I thought, as so many people did, that January 6th was the go no go line. Yep. It turns out if that's not the line, there is no line, and this party will go anywhere in its pursuit of power.
Yeah, it's why Romney, Kinzinger, Cheney, Jason and I have been in a perpetual conversation back and forth about how much credit we give to those people. I give them a lot of credit. And the reason why I give them a lot of credit is because the experiment has been run and we know how much outliers they are. And to me, that is admirable, because sure, I would do differently, but I'm also so far from the position that they were in that we can't judge, you can't judge me based on the statement that I would do things differently, right? Like, you have to be in their position. It's like saying if I were in Nazi Germany, I wouldn't be with the Nazis, right? It's like, until you're there and you make that decision under that amount of pressure, I should get no gold star for that, right? And for those folks, they really jeopardize their careers. And there's a lot of things that I think they all have done that I disagree with, and I think moral stands that I wish they would have taken. But that's a big one, and they all paid a pretty serious price for that, especially Liz Cheney. And I admire that. I'm not one of those Democrats who's like, holding to some like impossible standard. I think that what they did was pretty courageous.
I'm with you, and I've actually come around on that, because as a fierce partisan on big issues like reproductive rights and climate and things like that, I've been angry at the Kinzingers and the Cheneys and Romneys of the world. But one of the toughest things you can do is walk away from your tribe. And you said they sacrificed their careers to do that. They also sacrificed, in a very real way, their personal safety and the safety of their family members. I mean, Romney was paying $5,000 a week. Granted, he can afford it for personal security, but others haven't been able to afford that. And I'm not going to betray any confidences, but I know a Republican member of Congress whose family was very credibly threatened in a public place, and nevertheless, he held the line and voted against Trump. And yeah, it's easy for us to judge a Republican who votes against us on the issues we care about. But the fundamental issue in our society is preservation of democracy. At least it is right now. Because if that goes, none of the other issues matter. We can't litigate them. But if we lose a fight over abortion, as long as we have our democracy, we can keep winning hearts and minds. And Cheney and Romney and Kinzinger and the others, I know some listeners are going to hate that I say this, but they are heroes for at least defending democracy.
Yeah, I'm a big tent Democrat, and I would even say I'm a big tent person, period, meaning that I wouldn't even ask these people to be Democrats. I just ask them to vote with us for democracy, both within whatever legislatures they're in, and then when candidates like Trump are on the ballot. That is my one issue right now. I have a lot of other things I care passionately about, but nothing happens on any of the stuff we care about if the democracy isn't preserved. And we're once again barreling into an election where it's all on the line again, probably in ways that are even more significant than ever before, because Trump on a revenge tour is as dangerous as he could possibly be. And if he's able to survive all these indictments and win re-election, I don't want to be alarmist, but where do we go from there?
Let me challenge your conditional statement there. Even if he doesn't survive the indictments, there's a lot to be worried about. I think too many people in our camp are putting too much faith in the potential successful outcomes of these prosecutions. I'm not sure that gets us clear of the danger. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that a president can't be running the military from prison.
Right. Yeah, and actually, to clarify what I meant if he survives those cases and becomes president, not that the cases will prevent him from becoming president, but the combination of those two is very dangerous. It'd be like a drug lord running the country, El Chapo from prison or something. But it's all it's all scary, and this is just our defining characteristic of our generation. And look, like every generation has their calling, and the way I try to frame it positively is we can't control what hand we're dealt, but in a weird way, I'd rather, if there is going to be an era like this, I'd rather live in this era than like the 80s and 90s if we were the equivalent age, when honestly, like there wasn't the same kind of fights over the future of the country, right? These things only come along every once in a while, right? Civil War, World War II, right? Like the Civil Rights Movement. And I'm not saying these are, exactly on par with that, but this is a serious threat to the country. And when you're trying to frame it positively, it's like, well, okay, we get to be, we get to be tested as a generation, right? And there are different ways that you could show leadership, right? Like you don't have to be in Congress or the Senate to stand up and say, this isn't acceptable, and to do everything you possibly can. And then when you're bouncing your grandkids on your knees, you could tell them about, hey, like I helped save this democracy. Or if you're in my, mountain hideaway in Costa Rica, hiding from the U.S. authorities under the Trump dictatorship, we could be bouncing our grandkids on our knees up there in our jungle hideaway. But either way, we could at least say we fought the fight,
Well, that seems like a desperate search for a silver lining, but I guess I'll take it. And I don't think we'll be the ones volunteering their stories. I really do feel like this era is something our grandkids and great grandkids are going to be talking about and wanting to learn about. It is that historic. Nobody really knows how long a democracy can last, because we've already lasted longer than any democracy in history. Do we get another few hundred years, or is this it? And it really is in our hands, and that is epic in every sense of the word. That is epochal. So yeah, in a way, I'm glad to be living through this time with at least some ability to influence outcomes. I want to bring us full circle, because when it comes to threats to democracy and undermining democratic norms and the institutions that uphold them, I think no one gets more credit than Josh Hawley. He encouraged the insurrectionists. He objected to the certification. I think you're right. At the time, I suspect he thought he was just making a name for himself, and looking back, had really no idea the forces he would unleash. But now you have a Senate that is falling apart. I mean, it bears almost no resemblance to the Senate of just a few years ago. You have all of these one-person holds in complete disregard of the reason they exist and the decorum that usually governs them. And just today, I want to roll this clip. We had a fight nearly break out on the floor of the U.S. Senate. A U.S. senator challenged the head of the Teamsters to a cage fight on the floor of the Senate. Roll the clip, and then I want your thoughts.
Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution, everybody?
Hold it. No, sit down.
Right, Eric,
Sit down. Look at you. You're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond, Mr.
Hold it. If
Hold
we
on.
can't, no,
This is
I have
what
the
he
mic.
said.
I'm sorry.
This is
Hold
what
it.
he said.
You'll have your time.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Oh, no, you can't. This is a hearing. And God knows the American people have enough of contempt for Congress. Let's not
I don't
make
like
it worse.
thugs and bullies.
You have,
And that's
you
what-
have
I don't like
the
you
mic.
because you
Hold
just
it.
described yourself.
Hold it. You have the mic.
Yeah.
You have time.
All right.
Make your statement.
Then let's do this, because I did challenge you and I accepted your challenge, and you went quiet.
No, I didn't go quiet.
hold on.
No,
You challenged me to a cage match,
No,
acting like a
sir.
12-year-old schoolyard bully.
Excuse
Sir,
me.
hold on.
Hold it. No, excuse me. I have the
I will
mic.
say exactly.
Senator
what you
Mullen,
said.
I have the mic.
Ravi, I don't know what you could possibly say about that other than, and we're living in an era where, the one body of government that used to be the cooling saucer, right, is an embarrassment for us all.
Yeah, I mean, what Republicans would say is, you had the caning incident in the 1800s and all that, and their fights, but come on, we're supposed to be better than previous generations, and nothing in recent memory resembles this, right? Now, there's a couple interesting things about this clip. One is just the presence of Bernie Sanders is fascinating to me. It's just it's so hilarious to me. I've never been a Bernie guy, but it's hilarious that was Bernie in that room. Two is this obviously is a reflection of the fish rotting from the head down, or whatever they say. Is when you have the leader of your party bulldozing any norm and being such a selfish, aggressive character, then it gives license to everybody underneath him to do that. And then the Teamsters guy needs to bear some blame for this. You shouldn't be telling sitting senators you want to fight them. But I would put those three in that order. I think that when you're a president and then senator and then Teamster president, your responsibilities kind of rank in that order, but it doesn't make anybody look good. And I think there was a previous hearing where there was a female labor leader on a panel when these two had fought it out before and were accusing each other of stuff. And she made some comment about how that, I think either she or somebody made a comment about the incident saying this is why we need more female labor leaders, because this is clearly stupid. Nobody comes out, only Bernie Sanders came out looking good in that exchange.
Yeah. Although the funniest criticism I heard of Bernie was that he should have let him fight.
Yeah, I mean that's what Jason and I kind of said, but my sort of I said this as a joke, but I have to really think about whether I actually believe it, because it's possible I do, that letting them fight would have been better for our democracy, because it would have been the honest reflection of where we are, right? Actually having them fight would reveal, because nobody's watching this hearing otherwise, right? What people aren't seeing is that there's not other senators sitting at the table in a critical hearing, right? What people aren't seeing, it's just two of them sitting there, from what I could tell, Sanders and this guy. What they're not seeing is the holds that you're talking about. I don't know how many Americans know about Tommy Tuberville's unconscious holds on military personnel, right? You'd almost want this fight so that people can have a moment to say, whoa, something's out of control here in the Senate, and actually I can make it tangible for you. I almost think that would have been better.
Yeah, I don't know, but when Bernie Sanders said, "You're a U.S. Senator, act like it," what I began to think was, well, maybe this is how U.S. Senators act. And
right.
It just made me so sad, because I guarantee you this Oklahoma senator is going to go back to his state and turn this into an ad, or he's going to be high-fived by his buddies at the shooting range, because they think that tough guy act makes a man. This is something else we need to talk about with respect to Hawley. He's offering a prescription to young men across America for what manliness is. I mean, he even wrote a book about it, right? And It is just so sad to me that this vision of masculinity is being sold by the most powerful men in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is in line with the there's a spectrum. Obviously, the Hawley, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, To be clear, I don't think Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate are in the same vicinity of each other, but like this whole internet culture of, speaking to the young men out there, like the problem they're trying to address is out there. There is a problem, and I'm sure you've talked about it on this show, is like there's declining statistics in all sorts of alarming ways about young men in this country, and the GOP is preying upon them. And what I found interesting about Josh Hawley's book is that he, on the one hand, is like, you're not the victim, yada, yada, yada. And then he precisely says in his book, and we did a whole segment on Majority 54 about it, he then proceeds to blame the liberals and everybody else for the problems of the young men sitting in their metaphorical basements. And I'm like, look, whatever your problems are, and like, we're young men, like, we should all be coming together as a society to say, what can we do? And the sad part is there's a version of Josh Hawley that could play a meaningful part of that, right? Like, well, what could we do? We could break up these mega corporations that are consolidating industries, cutting off pathways of employment for people, hollowing out middle America, making it harder to get by, right? We could talk about how this generation, the younger generation, it's become less affordable to buy a house or to go to college or to get healthcare and all that. That stuff is all getting in their way. We could talk about national service, right? Which is something I'm sure you're passionate about, like whether people serve in the military or they become doctors, teachers, social workers. Why haven't we had an expansion of those programs at a time when we're talking about student loan debt, right? Like why isn't there a group of people at the table hashing out a deal to say, all right, like, let's actually push through robust student loan cancellation but do it forward looking too, and say all these people who go into these critical jobs, let's expand. Like, there's small programs that do this, but let's make them robust and say, if you become a teacher, you serve in the military, like make the GI Bill more generous, and then make it available to people who don't serve in the military too. And then you can have people from all over the country who are young people. We can pull them off the metaphorical couch, get them critical training, get them into jobs that we need. I just got back from Mississippi earlier this fall, where there's a critical doctor and nurses and teacher shortage, right? Let's send people out there, get them jobs, and then they could rub shoulders. A Staten Islander could rub shoulders with a person from the Bronx, and a person from the Bronx with a person from Abbeville, Alabama. And, one person at a time, we could build a shared empathy of each other in this country. I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox, but like, these are the kinds of things that these folks should be getting involved in if they truly care about the plight of young men in this country.
I agree with you 100%. And I mean, there are so many aspects to masculinity, and in my mind, none of them are performative.
Right.
None of them have to do with packing heat, carrying a gun around, or fist pumping insurrectionists. And I think it's telling that Hawley literally launched his book Manhood at a conference, the Stronger Men's Conference, that opened with, I don't know if you've seen this, but you've got to look it up. Maybe I'll cut to it here. It opens with a Jesus or Chuck Norris lookalike, it's hard to tell, driving a tank, crushing cars, flanked by flamethrowers. And he's got Uzis that he's shooting into the air. And that seems to be the vision of masculinity that the right, led by Josh Hawley, is selling today. And it's just depressing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, I don't know how to put this, but Josh Hawley wouldn't have ranked as the 1,000th most masculine person I knew in New Haven at that period of time. And so he seems like a strange vessel for this. And, what masculinity is or is not is such a complicated question. But I think of it as like, and I also, I think that like what liberals should be comfortable with is acknowledging the importance of it. Like, and Scott Galloway, and I think some others have eloquently talked about this. And I do think that there's a need for people who are centrists and liberals who are willing to acknowledge the place that masculinity and young men have in this world. And the obvious thing to say is that the biggest problem has and will always be for the rest of our lives discrimination against women. Like that is obvious, but that can coexist with the problem that young men have today. And they're different problems in many ways. Some of them rhyme or whatever, but I think it's important for more voices on the left and the center to speak to young men and make them feel like they're heard. And I do think that there's some room for that. There's more room for that. And, you know, and I think we just need to build counters to that, you know, that uplift people instead of making them feel like they're victims.
Agree as well. We've got a project in the works. Hope to be able to share more about it soon. Any interesting topics or guests coming up on Majority 54 or with anything else you're doing?
Yeah, I would say they're twofold. One is, well, you know, this week on Majority 54 or whenever you air this, like, you know, we basically hit whatever the topics are of the week. So that's always a great listen. And we kind of have been having a perpetual debate. Last week we had one about whether Biden should run again, and Jason and I were on different sort of corners on that one, so people could listen to that. And I think what people will find is that it was a more candid conversation than I think a lot of like sort of the big left-wing politics are willing to go. But on Lost Debate, which is like my kind of nonpartisan podcast, we've seen huge growth of our audience over the past few weeks just because I've been doing a lot of content on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and people can go to that feed at Lost Debate. And what you'll see is if you go back a couple episodes, I did a 4-part series on the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which are the most listened to episodes we've ever had. And there's a part 1, and I call it the unbiased history, even though like nobody's unbiased, but I give my like as objective as a take as possible. So I go through unbiased history 1, unbiased history 2. I do a history of Hamas. And then I've started to do contemporary episodes on what's going on now, where I start to share my opinions. But with the history, what I tried to do is make it so that if you're listening to it, you wouldn't know what my opinion is about the conflict if you didn't listen to it. So those have been really popular. You can go check those out at the Lost Debate show.
Awesome. We will put that link in the show notes. I'll check it out myself. Ravi, as always, great catching up with you.
Thank you, my friend.